So hi everyone, my name is Jenny Wong. I am an engineering manager now at Hummermade, but I started there as a web developer, so that's where my roots are. And as Dan hinted at the beginning of this whole evening, I have been known to do quite a lot of WordCamps. I get bored quite easily and then just come up with really interesting ideas and then rope everyone else to come and help me, like Diane. So, yeah, I like going on adventures with people, doing interesting things.
I don't think you sleep, do you, Jenny? I can't imagine that there's much time in your life for sleeping or resting.
Really well. I do very big, deep sleep. There's no sleep in there. It's like all or nothing kind of thing. So yeah, that is me. I have been a remote worker for 6 years and 1 month now. We're just coming into my 6th year, and we've just gone past my 6th year anniversary at Hummermade, which is how I count these years. And before that, I was in a office. Both everyone was in the office, and I've also worked as the sole remote worker to an office, which all those experiences are very different. So when we're talking about the way we work with each other, each one has its unique viewpoints. And I have asked, and Leo and Diane have agreed to join into the conversation because I know, Diane, you've been a freelancer, I think, ever since I've known you, really. And then Leo runs an agency, Celtic, which you were, I believe, an office-based place, but also went remote quite recently, I think.
So we went remote. I went remote 2.5 years ago when we moved the office to Cardiff, and went from commuting every day to remote now. Before all of this, the fun happened. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to watch people be forced into remote, because it's one thing to really feel like you get a choice about where you want to work, but then to be forced into be fully remote is quite interesting. And at Hummermade, we usually have members of staff in co-working spaces, or we actually do have an office in the UK, and people would work from the office. Not many people work at the office because most of us don't live anywhere near it, but there was a small handful of people who would go to that office. So being forced to stay in our own buildings and houses have definitely changed the mindset, not just for people who are used to commuting to offices, but actually also for fully remote workers as well, because things that you thought you could do no longer are applicable anymore. If you have any questions, do please bring them up. I have got the hallway track on my second screen, so if you see me look away, that is exactly where I'm looking at.
So as you said, go on, Diane.
Sorry, I was really interested to hear, because I've worked with people that are used to working 100% in the office, and I when I became freelance, one of the things I loved is remote working, and I think you can do it either incredibly well, but people that aren't used to it find it incredibly difficult. And I wondered what your experience was of working as the only remote worker in an office.
I hated it. I hated it so much. I couldn't even bear it, because I had to. I almost quit my uni degree, my final year at uni, because I hated it that much, and I just wanted to be in the office and hang out with my colleagues. Because the thing about being the sole remote worker is you miss every single water cooler joke or that thing that happened that everyone's been talking about in the office, and they don't tell you about it. And I had to go to the office, I think it was every 2 weeks or like 2 to 3 weeks, I'd go to the office for one day just to like catch up in person and do like meetings and stuff on one day. And they would be like, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah happened. Or like, the joke would carry on, but you would not know where that joke came from. So you always felt like a bit of a weird, I love you all, but I also don't know who you are kind of situation.
I think it's quite interesting. It's sort of like going on holiday, going back to the place 2 weeks later, and everything's moved on, and you find that feeling. So my office, so the majority of my staff work in Cardiff, or they did. We had an office there, and I think you're absolutely right, Jenny. You feel detached when there's that split between remote and everybody in the office. It's finding that balance with the two.
Yeah,
So,
and one of the things we did when we ever have, so in Human Made, sometimes colleagues, actually I've got colleagues who live quite close to me, and we would actually go and meet up at a co-working space, but we would end up on the same meeting. We actually had a rule in the company for a while, which was along the lines of, if you are in the same meeting, still connect as you are on your own, because this way everyone who's in the meeting has the same situation. Whereas if you have two people together and you're passing notes between each other, that's like, you know, there's a side thing going on that no one else knows about, and it's a bit unfair. So it's about leveling that playing field across the road, across the
I agree. I think we've all been in this situation where you're in a remote meeting with 3 people in the office, and they suddenly mute you, and it's like, or they why are you muted? Or they mute themselves. Why are you muted and I can't hear what you're saying? It's like,
I know.
It's like,
what did I do badly this time? What did I spell incorrectly this time?
Yeah, that's it. So, I mean, there's a question up here which is interesting from Richard Bell. I don't think we've written it up yet, but it is, why do you think certain companies seem to struggle with the concept of remote working? And do you think it's a trust control thing? I mean, you've got that experience. What do you think?
I think it depends. There is definitely, if you are used to a particular situation, then yes, like doing something new is scary, especially when the current situation works for everyone, right? So like, why would you upset what works to change for something else? And that can be a little daunting. And so yes, trust does come into it, but there's also another side to it. The other side is the human aspect side of the fact that we are social animals. We can like certain amounts of social interactions as much, like, you know, in different levels, but even, you know, being with people who are consider themselves introverts or things like that, they like being in the same room as someone. There is some kind of like connection that you're in the same space, and sharing that space with people is quite important. And what you see more recently, for countries that have been in lockdown, obviously not all countries have been in lockdown, but for countries that have been in lockdown and imposed lockdown on all their citizens, a lot of people have really craved and missed social interactions, even at distance, with people that they don't usually interact with. So if you're with your family all day, you just want to get out of the house. You just need, you know, the delivery person who comes and drop off your parcel is now your best friend. Situation, you know, and so that there's a balance. It's a part of it is the psychological need, I guess, to be around a society of people and be part of a group and physically see them. And part of that is also, you know, trust. And it will, you know, it's a balance between the two. I can't always say it's one or the other. You know, it's going to be a mixture of things.
So we're talking about it from a company perspective. That always that question comes up. We get it quite a lot. I get it quite a lot. Is how do I know that person who's working from home is actually working? That trust level, you know, and that's it. And
yeah, that's a good question. I think it really comes down to the way you communicate. So there's we all do lots of work, right? Regardless of what role you do in a company or even as a freelancer with your clients, there's loads of invisible work that you do. Like, you know, writing up meeting notes is something that I, as an engineer, never appreciated, but writing up meeting notes takes time. Like it's not a 5-minute job. It's like a good 30 minutes, if not longer, depending on how verbose you need those meeting notes to be. But like, if you don't point out the work that you're doing to your other colleagues, how are they meant to know? We seem to assume, and this is the thing about remote working, is that we're all telepathic. And the reality is, if we were in the office, that telepathic knowledge you have comes from sight. It comes from hearing. It comes from, you know, the background noise that you're hearing, that you've heard someone's talking about a project. But when you're remote, your telepathy to your colleagues has disappeared. So you have to create that telepathy in another manner, and that's usually around communication. And if anything there is to take away from this conversation, it's over communication. There is no such thing as over communication in a remote space. The second you think you're over communicating, you're probably hitting about the right mark. Especially if you are working in a remote company that is spanning across the globe. Like I need to write my notes that they're so verbose that the person in Auckland does not need to ask me 1,000 questions because it will take a 12-hour delay before I get a response back. So if you imagine all your colleagues are out in space and that time signal and that time lag is going to be, hours, then you realize that you don't want to be waiting hours to have one conversation. You share as much as you can so that they can share as much back and as much detail. So the amount of ping-ponging of information is shortened.
So we've had questions along that line of what tools in particular do you find that you would use, Jenny? What tools do you recommend? And I'm going to ask that also to Diane as well, to make that experience better.
Diane, do you want to go first?
Well, I was going to say that the tools are brilliant. Like, for example, Slack. We all use Slack, but if you're working, like I recently was working with Bright Talk, and I noticed that a lot of the communication happened in private messages, and I tried to encourage people to actually post more in the public channels if they weren't specifically private. Actually, because then everybody else knows what you're doing, because otherwise it can seem like you're silent all day. No one has any idea what you're doing. And unless it's private, and usually in most projects, there's not that much that you actually need to keep private. So it's not necessarily the tools, but I think it's it's the way that you use the tools. And I think I think transparency, Slack is brilliant. But it's only as brilliant as you use it. All of the tools that we have, email, Slack, Zoom, they're all only as good as your actual practices. So it's like I said, it's not so much the tools, but using them in the right way. Sure. Kind of let everybody actually see.
Yeah, definitely. And knowing where your single source of truth is for your company as well. So at Human Made, we use GitHub. Like if there's an issue in operations, there is a GitHub conversation going. And then there's also Slack. And then we also use, we actually have a multi-site of installation of WordPress where all the blogs are actually basically blogs of the project. And we use that to be like kind of a newsletter-y style. That's really like if it's written there, the communication's there, and it's searchable as well. The other thing that I totally agree with Diane, when you said like it's all about the transparency, I was like, yes, I'm like where's my 100 emoji? As well. How does someone know you've read that communication? Yeah. Right? So if you read something, like communicate that you've read it, or communicate that you like it, and so a lot of like Slack conversations, I will thumbs up them to say to the person, I'm cool with that, like I'm good with that. Having those custom ones, and I have a little custom emoji that just say thanks, which really allows you to communicate without bloating up Slack, which can be a bit of a problem. Yeah. And the same with like the WordPress installation we have reactions in our posts, so you can actually react to any of the posts, and GitHub also has that as well. But really using reactions as a way to bring in that body language, that word. Exactly.
That's Dan. Dan said that. Because one of the things, Jenny, if maybe you can touch on it quickly. My understanding or my experience is that Human Made have got an HR manual online. How does that help in that remote communication and remote understanding of how to work?
It helps to a certain degree. I think it helps to set an expectation. But in all honesty, I mean, some people at Human Made have been here a long time, and it's really easy to get out of the habit as well. So sometimes we will use it as a way to remind people, hey, remember we all agreed to this conversing with each other. And it's like, you think a company like Human Made, which is fully remote we've been running, I think, fully remote for 8 years now. There was a couple of years when we weren't fully remote. And to say like people still get out of the habits, people still DM. And the other thing I'd say about DMs is actually, if you go on Slack and you have a conversation, and you're like, oh, can we just jump on a call instead? And then you have that conversation in Zoom or something, and then everyone's happy who are in the call. But anyone else who saw the thread and then the call and then nothing, we're like, well, what happened?
So, I mean, it's a classic.
Like, this is what happened in the call. This is the agreement, and then this is the agreement that we've come out of it.
I mean, I think we can always talk about. I mean, at the moment, Slack is the big thing that we use in a lot of the communications because it just happens to be the one of the there. But I think, as you've touched on, there is that level of using it is more important than the tool. What other tools, though, before we go completely to another area, are there any other tools that you feel are just the go-to that you need to, if you're in a remote environment, to use?
I feel like Zoom or like any kind of video conferencing call system is vital. And the reason why is because there is nothing like hearing somebody's voice, hearing the intonations in their voice and the tone that they're taking. If you're tired, you're going to be like, oh, I'm so tired. You can visually see, you start getting those like speaker hints and stuff that you get when you're doing these kind of stuff that you just don't get in text. The nearest you get is emojis, but so that's that. You have to balance the two and really use them both to your advantage. And some conversations are way easier in voice rather than in the actual thing. So do turn your cameras on if you can.
Isn't there a cameras on policy in Human Made, if I'm right, on certain things?
I honestly don't remember anymore. I have a camera on. If I am facilitating the call and you don't have your camera on, I do usually ask, can you turn your camera on? Especially if it's a difficult conversation, definitely turn your camera on. But sometimes, you've also got to be mindful of the fact that internet is expensive. It is a luxury, and the cost of turning your camera on for some people is actually quite high. So if the connection is really bad, you've got to balance it between, I'd rather hear their voice and not see them than, have a jaunted conversation where everything's really laggy. So you've got to really balance it. Even if it's in our handbook, there's the pragmatic side to how you run your day-to-day operations.
So this is going to be the question that we're probably all going to dread, because we always see the one view of everybody at home.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask whether you're going to do this or not, Jenny, because I haven't told you in advance. Are you willing to take a picture of what you're looking at and show us?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Diane. Diane's got that look of like, oh dear, I've been caught in the headlights now.
No, I might take a picture. I'm gonna. Oh.
I'm taking a picture as well. So, are we ready?
Because
we ready to show our pictures? Go.
So mine's got, because I've got blinds. I have, as I was discussing earlier, I have my desk in the window, which is lovely, except for when it's 30 degrees outside, because I'm in a glass house.
So
everyone, if you can't see it, but what you can see is a full bin on one side. You can probably, if I actually pull it out, there's a Coke can and a glass, which is actually quite good for my desk. My desk is usually about 3 cups of tea that are all half drank, about at least 2 glasses, about 3 or 4 Coke cans that are like all over the place. So I spend a lot of time at my desk. And
so
one thing
what would be the first thing if somebody's doing this new, or when we're all pretty much doing it, not we've been doing it for a while, what would you say is the best investment that you've made that somebody should be making to improve their experience from home?
The ergonomics of your setup, that's really important. And really, it's about investment. If you are going to be a remote worker long term, you need a chair that is going to support your body. And I know it's really expensive, but if you divide the amount of hours against the cost that you spend on it, it's actually not that bad. If you are a company that can afford it, trying to offset people's investments is really important. So Human Made has a whole section on, office equipment that we actually just pay straight out.
So are you allowed to ask what chair you're sitting on, or is that?
No, go for it. I am on a size A Herman Miller Aeron, which is really good. This is
I'm on a size B. There you go. I have a size B and I have a spare size B.
And I've just realised I've got to get myself a decent chair. I think my dad gave me this.
I actually got mine. Sorry?
If you are going to get a chair, a pro tip, especially if you're planning to get a Herman Miller one, go on eBay. They're literally half the price and they're really good. Mine was an eBay one and it works really good. Even if it's a refurb, they are actually really, really good. And it's not at all about how much money you spend on it. It's just literally like where you can get a good bargain. The desk, like we always get this with every new person, the desk. IKEA do a really good electronic 6 stand desk, which means that you can get it to the right size. I'm 5'2" and my partner's 6 foot. When he sits at my desk, it looks like he's sitting at a children's desk. And when I sit at his, I feel like this.
I think these are valuable experiences because, as you say, you're spending a long time. In fact, in a way, I think I'm spending longer at my desk per day than I used to spend when I was in an office, because there isn't that. If I want to have a chat with somebody, I'm still sitting here.
Well, the thing is,
in fact, it's now 8:00 at night, 8:30 at night, and I'm still sitting here.
And I can keep on having this conversation. And this is the magic of a stand desk that is electric.
This.
Do not get the one that you turn. You're just too lazy to turn it. Just get the electric. One of our colleagues bought the
Diane, why would you know that Jenny would say something like, "Don't bother with that. It's too lazy. Do this." That's how Jenny is. Like, don't argue. That's what Jenny says. Do it.
Honestly, one of my colleagues bought the one that uses a handle to turn, and I literally said to him, "How often have you turned it?" And he was like, "About once." And I was like, "Yeah, to get it to the right height to sit at." And I bet you never stood at it. And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Just dismantle it, send it back to IKEA, and get the other one."
I think it's a very valid point, because we've got, in our office, we've got all these height adjustable desks, but to adjust the height on the desk is so difficult.
And you get tennis. Like, so I've got tennis elbow, and I've also got RSI from when I used to work at a coffee shop. And so I can feel when my partner has sat at my desk, moved my desk, and then my arms are just a little bit too high, my wrists are a little bit too high, and it starts, like 2 hours in, I'm like, something's not right. Like, your body knows, and it starts
when this finger goes numb, that's when I know I have to go and make a cup of tea.
I thought, Diane, I thought it was when you had to make a cup of tea was when there's things being thrown at you from Mick. It's like,
well, actually, Mick, Mick always, especially if I'm on a meeting, Mick comes in like this, and he does this creeping thing, which is really funny because he's wheeling one-handed with a cup, but he always brings me tea, and so everyone now thinks that, everyone now thinks that I have waiter service. Kind of, he times it so that when I'm in a meeting.
this is why the cups go at my desk and then they would go downstairs. And this is why he says there's a free cup limit on my desk, and they're always on my left hand side. But in terms of other things that you can do for your desk, I recommend really thinking about what you're using and making sure that your monitor is at the right height and your laptop's at the right height. It's about making things easy for yourself, especially if you're doing this long term. So I have a mouse here, which is one of those upright mice here. It's like a wired one because I'm too lazy to recharge my mice too often. So I got a wired one, and it's like that. This cost me £25 off Amazon, and it honestly is one of the best mice that I've used if I'm sat at my desk all day long. I also I have one monitor here and then my laptop on this side, and I will take some pictures and share them on Twitter because I've done this before. And it really, really makes a difference to the type of monitor you get. So if you're buying a new monitor, make sure you're getting one that actually works with your computer to the best way it's possible. So USB-C, where it's got all the ports in, so you can just put everything against the monitor. And if you do need to move out, it's just one cable. I know it sounds silly to think, well, the difference between 3 cables having to be plugged in and 1 cable has to be plugged in, that's not a big deal, right? But when I used to work in an office, every day I'd come to my office and have to put my laptop down and plug it in because I've been using it somewhere else. And 1, 2, 3. That's just like 3 too many things to do. And
I'm detecting a very long chain that can keep repeating.
That simplicity thing that we were saying earlier, isn't it? Keep it as simple as possible.
I'm assuming, Jenny, you're in a house where if something doesn't last the dishwasher, it shouldn't have ever been bought in the first place.
Yeah, no, definitely.
That's it.
Any work cup or mug or a hot water bottle that does not last the dishwasher, it's
a waste of time. I'm absolutely with you on that. I'm absolutely with you.
My life, I just got too many. I don't want the stress. Being a remote worker is stressful. You've got to try and translate your colleagues, what they're saying. You've already having to try and work on your communication so that you're verbose. And someone did ask the question about, whether you need to be a bit more verbose and if that means better documentation. The answer is yes, usually. But it takes time and practice, right? So really, like, if you can negate anything that makes your life difficult as much as possible, and it comes down to simple things like, potentially, if your laptop's too low, build yourself a Lego stand out of Lego and sit it on top, or get those books that you never use and lift your monitor up so that you're actually at the right height, because then you're sitting up straight, you're really thinking about your posture. When you change your posture, you change the way you breathe, and when you change the way you breathe, your brain has more oxygen and more energy to actually think about the things that you pay to think about.
How do you find
productivity, though? I do put that caveat there.
How do you find, and this again to both, because I have this, sometimes I can sit there and I can sit down at 8:30 in the morning and suddenly realize it's 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. And all I've done is I put the coffee machine on 3 times that I've never actually drunk the coffee because it's cold. And how do you find a way to balance that out, to get that free
time? I do. Let me demonstrate this to you.
Oh yeah, no, Jenny told me about this because I said about the heartbreak of discovering a half-drunk cup of tea.
So what's this, Jenny?
So my colleague Jay introduced me to this, and you can get USB versions of it. It is a tea warmer. In the middle of this, light it. It goes on your desk like this, and then you put your coffee on top. And then it keeps it nice and warm.
As long as it's only tea that you put in there, Jenny. That's all.
Yeah, no. It's only tea or coffee or whatever that you have. And the other trick is just to drink cold drinks. Like, come to set something up.
You mean like alcohol? Drink alcohol?
Yeah.
We're not saying that.
Mine, but I was just trying to look professional and not drink it on camera.
a question. I'm interested on another thing, which is audio. We've talked about various different things that you used, and you talked about Zoom. Do you have either of you used any audio communication between places? And the one that I use a hell of a lot at the moment has been Discord. Have you ever used that with your teams?
No, I know other people have done, and I have been on Discords for other things. It honestly really is about, as far as I'm concerned, the workflow, the agreement between colleagues or the group that you're working with, regardless of what project you're on, about the way you are going to communicate and making sure that there are retros, so you're reevaluating and discussing ways to improve it, and not being scared to say to someone, hey, your microphone sounds a bit like it's not in the right location. Can you try and adjust that? And being out front, or like you're saying, like your connection seems a bit laggy. Do you want to restart your computer? Yeah. I'm really being mindful of the fact that tech things break. I have been on enough calls where the internet breaks in the middle of a really important call to a client, and then I have to quickly switch over to 3G and pray they didn't notice and someone has got my back. I'm being a little empathetic. We are all in this situation together, and we will come out a bit laughing, because if you don't laugh, you're probably going to cry about it, and it's not worth it.
Do you actually factor in regular breaks in your thing, and how regular do you do it?
The answer is no. But no, one thing I do actually is I really encourage my engineers, and I have done this a couple of times, is factor in breaks between my calls. So I have a rule which is 15 minutes between each call. So I don't ever take calls back to back until the very last minute, so like when things get changed. But I try, and when I'm designing my weeks, really design them with 15-minute breaks in between. That's long enough for me to run downstairs, put the kettle on, come back upstairs, go to the bathroom, wash my hands, get back to my desk, rearrange whatever I need to rearrange, and then take a deep breath and keep on going. And the other thing that I really recommend to engineers when they are really stressed out is actually start putting in out of office markers when they are going out for lunch.
That's a good point. Yeah. Diane, do you have the same sort of approach on those points?
The funny thing is that I only since lockdown have I actually started regularly taking lunch. I've had really bad habits where I would just sit all day and work through. And then because of lockdown, we got into this habit of going out for a walk once a day. And so now and of course it's been gorgeous sunshine. So I now take an hour at lunch, and rather than taking breaks, luckily I drink a lot of tea, and that means I actually regularly get up from my desk. And that means that at least, the blood is moving around in my legs. But apart from the tea, I'm really bad at taking breaks until recently. And I've decided that what I'm going to try and do is keep this hour lunch break, because, I think that, sometimes you're working on you're a developer. Sometimes you're working on a problem. You can't stop. Yeah. I always say to people, you can't stop in the middle of a problem and then come back to it like 15 minutes later, because it takes a while to get back into that headspace. But at some point in the day, and it doesn't matter even if it's like 3 o'clock, then I take an hour and I go for a walk around, and yeah, so yeah, so lockdown has actually improved my working practices, and I'm going to try and actually keep that, because I think that it's kind of good to just have a break in the day. But
we talked about Slack and using that. Do you then have short codes that you use to communicate? That I use AFK, or our company uses AFK for that.
Yeah, we just shout lunch. And it's funny actually, because so depending, like you see the APAC team will start going for lunch, and then you start seeing them all disappearing, and then you see the EMEA team coming online and would be like, hey, like the mornings will start, and then you'd be like lunch, and everyone jumps on the lunch train, so everyone goes +1, +1, +1, +1. And then you use the back emoji to say we're already back. But in all honesty, I don't. I kind of try and remember, but sometimes I don't. Because there's other things, but I do always try and do an hour for lunch when I can. I actually get really angry when I don't, because sometimes you need that time.
We can't imagine that or picture that.
But it's just like you really need to, like, even just standing up and doing some like nice big arm stretches if you have the space, and really just even one things I do, like now I'm stood up, I can just stand on my tiptoes and then just tiptoe up and down like this, and just wiggle yourself around, just kind of get yourself loose, because sometimes I do see people really struggle to concentrate, and all they need to really do is have a big stretch, get some air into themselves, deep breath, and that break actually helps them reset and try and figure out what they're doing. So it's really a balance between the two.
So moving on slightly, as you're a company, you get involved and you see other companies, and you're heavily involved in seeing what other people do. Is there what's the biggest mistake you're seeing with companies that really are making, that are coming new into this environment?
The biggest mistake I'm seeing really is the way that companies think they can just let all their employees go fully remote without any support, really, and that is the major bit. It is a growing pain that you have to go through that pain together. But I think really talking about that pain is really important, because when you share that pain in Slack, hey, has anyone got a solution for this? Or this is how I find out about things like this. My tea keeps on going cold. What? How do people get their tea done? Stay warm.
I think that's what we're here for today, really, Jenny. That's it. That's the thing you've shared, and that's it. If you feel nothing else of today, nothing is more important than how to keep your cup of tea hot.
We've done this for a long time about how trips and tips of how to stay cool in a UK household, which basically no one has aircon built into their house.
Exactly. We need that instruction for 4 days, and today is one of them.
I know, exactly. I will pro tip you all for tomorrow. Get your hot water bottles, put them in the freezer. Tomorrow, put it in your bed before you go to bed, and you'll have a really nice cold bed to go and sleep in. You're welcome.
Just don't overfill it, or you'll have a very, very broken hot water bottle.
About half, because that way it expands. That's true. But I would usually say, if you're thinking about doing it remote, it's really about the company having the support structure.
So on that one, and I know you've sort of covered that. What systems do you use to share knowledge while working remote? I know is there anything particular that you choose?
Yeah, I usually, it depends on the longevity of the knowledge that you are sharing. So if you're sharing a quick remark, probably Slack, because it's just a one-off remark. But if someone else finds it useful, we quite often tell each other, hey, that's really useful. Could you please document that and copy it into one of the company's blogs, so that everyone can hear about it. Because if you remember, Slack is a continuous stream of consciousness. So someone from APAC is not really encouraged to, back scroll and read 2 regions worth of communication. That's not really sustainable. And you shouldn't expect people to read back scrolls. So it's great for, a certain amount of communication. But if you're expecting someone in a week's time to find that information, forget it, because they just press the all red button and it's not happening. Blogs, comments on blogs, and it's surprising what people will find useful. Like, we have whole sections, even in our handbook, there's a page about turning off notifications, because I found lots of people won't actually get into the habit of reevaluating what communication and notifications they're actually allowing to bother them. And as an engineering manager, I see that all the time. And I naturally get angry with all notifications, so I turn everything off. But in there is actually originally written as a one of our private blogs, and so many people found it useful. That's in the blog itself. They were like, "Hang on a second, that blog should be part of the handbook. Why can you copy and paste it?" And I was like, "Sure." So, edit, post, copy, paste, move it to another blog, which is the handbook blog. And so everyone gets to see it.
So just the final question I have for you, Jenny. We're here. You've gone through this. You've now spent, is it 6 years, you said, remote working? Yeah. Can you see Jenny back in an office?
Definitely. I've seen people go back and forth. I've got an engineer who has been remote working for over 4 years, really started struggling at home before COVID. And then, we talked about, how we were going to work out of this. And they said that, they'd been thinking about, finding that, social network and getting back out there and getting out of the house. So they had a commute to the office. And so they actually started renting a co-working space. And then COVID happened. So then they had to go back home. But actually, their co-working space is opening up next Friday, and I know they are counting down the days, because they have told me, to when their co-working space is working. And actually, they found by being able to go to an office, this is really important, you are able to switch on for work and then switch off at the end of the day, which is really important. One of the biggest flaws that a lot of people see is the mirage between work life and home life just continually disintegrate. And so we have long discussions at work continually over and over the years about how do you switch on and off. So some people who have dogs will go for a dog walk at the beginning and the end of their day. Some people will literally leave their house, walk around the building, and then come back into the house to go to work. Everyone has their habit. I've seen people who insist on their lunches never being from home, so they will always go out for lunch, which forces them to get out the house, walk, go somewhere, get their lunch and come back. It's that mentality of this is your break time, this is your time, and that's really important.
Diane, any last tips from you on this?
Yeah, so because a lot of the time I work for sort of clients in a freelance, it's that idea of socialization. It's the reason that I initially went to WordPress London. I think if you remote work, things like going to something like WordPress London for me was really important, because you it replaces that social life that you get from working with people. Because I realized that I have my family and I have my friends. They don't know what I do. Mick still thinks that it's the Matrix.
Yeah, we've had that discussion before. So he never knows. It's better he doesn't.
And so that's why initially that I went. I kind of realized that the one thing, because I love remote working, but there is that social aspect that you miss. And so I realized I could replace that by becoming involved in the community. And so my tip for anyone that is remote working and is struggling with talking to your peers in that, kind of in the way that you do in an office, then I think, kind of meetups can meet some of those requirements.
I agree.
I totally agree. I mean, this is why I go to so many, is my weekly, I see people. In the world.
We're gonna bring Dan and Paul back on. Thank you so much, Jenny. This has been I've really enjoyed this. It's a great conversation, and I'm going to pass back over to Dan.